Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peah, Perek Aleph, Halacha Dalit. We're going to be learning Daf Yud Beis. We left off on Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph, 5 lines from the top of the Daf by the new Mishnah. This Mishnah and the Sugya today will address what species, what types of produce, what types of fields are subject to the mitzvah of Peah. And as we will see in the Mishnah, there are 5 prerequisites. All of them have to be met for there to be a chiyuv in Peah. Actually, the Mishnah, especially according to our Girsa, will also include trees. That means a orchard, not all trees, but many trees will be chayiv. The owner of the tree, when he harvests, when he goes, picks the fruits, must leave. He will have to leave Peah. Just for the record, that really there's a machlekes tanoim, the machlekes rishonim, whether that's midoraisa or midrabanan. There is a shita of the Rabbeinu Tam that we have in Bavli Psachim that holds that what we're learning now, even though there's going to be psukim, it's all an asmachta, and he limits the biblical obligation to Peah to only the 5 grains and to olives and to grapes. We're not going to be learning the sugya according to the sheet of the Rabbeinu Tam. We learn Rambam daily. We're going to follow the sheet of Rambam, which is the halacha, that actually understands the sugya and the braisa not to be an asmachta, but to be actual pshat in the psukim. That indeed, as we will see, unlike many other obligations connected to produce, that midoraisa, it's very limited. Like we have by Trumas Umaisis, even though there's a 3-way machlekes. We're not going to get into that right now. We're going to learn our sugya that pay is going to be a very inclusive obligation, that any product, whether it is grains, whether it is legumes, whether kidneys, whether it is greens, even vegetables, according to the Rambam, not all of them, we'll see, whether they are fruits of the tree, as long as the 5 prerequisites that will be enumerated in the Mishnah are met, they will be chayiv midoraisa. They'll be included in the mitzvah of Peah. Now, in the Gemara, we're going to have 2 topics. The first one will be very short. The question is, as we already learned, the trigger for Peah is the harvesting of the field. That means that when I own a field and it's filled with produce and it's ripe, I'm not chayiv in Peah. Chiyuv in Peah begins when you begin to harvest. There are 3 ways of harvesting. One is called koitzer, one is called toilish, one is called oiker, as we'll explain when we learn the Gemara. And the first point will be simple, that no matter how you're harvesting, all midoraisa, whether you're koitzering, whether you're toilishing, whether you're oikering, we'll explain. Once you began, you trigger the obligation of Peah. But the ikir of today's daf will be about the following phenomenon. Again, we're learning the whole sugya, Kishitas Rambam, that as long as the 5 prerequisites, all 5 are there, there is an obligation to leave Peah, even from a fruit field, from an orchard, even though the Torah uses the words satcha by Peah. In other words, the word satcha, sadeh, does not exclude, actually it includes an orchard. The Gemara is going to point out that the same word of satcha that we find by the mitzvah or by the prohibition of kalayim. So we're going to learn today, we're going to have an opportunity to repeat the basic rules of kalayim. And I thank you, Rabbi, for helping us learn the Rambam, because now for those of us who learn Rambam, we're familiar with these halachas, but we're going to chazer. And as we will see, that really there are 2 parts of kalayim. There are 2 separate kalayims. There's kilei hakerem, which is unique, which is a lot more chamur, which is, as we will see, planting with the charzon, with the grapeseed, a grain. Okay, we'll see what else is included. We have the concept not of kilei of kalayim by akedem, but kalayim by zeroim. Kalayim by zeroim means that we are not allowed to plant together 2 different types of grains. We're not allowed to plant together 2 different types of kidneys. But by trees, there is no isur of kalayim. Wow. We have by trees, the Gemara doesn't speak about it now, we know this from the Rambam, the isur of grafting, midoraisa. Grafting means pachut. You take a branch, let's say from an orange tree, you have to know how to do it. Take a branch and you insert it in another type of tree. That is taka asun midoraisa. But the isur of planting, you are allowed even in a vineyard to plant an apple tree. There is no isur of trees in Kalayim. Why? Because the Torah says, Sotcha lo yisizra Kalayim, and that will be the whole point of the daf. So by Kalayim, the word Sotcha, field, excludes an orchard. By the din of Peah, the word Sotcha is actually the word from where we include the Rambam, even Midoiraisa, orchard in the din of Peah. This is not that much of a question. The Gemara doesn't word it this way, but that will be the whole daf today. But as we, God willing, we'll get to the end of the daf Yud Beis. It's a bekamos. It's a small daf. It's all about context. It's all about context. Since we know by Kalayim, the word Sotcha generally, Sizra does not mean an orchard. Zera. But when it comes to and therefore by Kalayim we exclude it. But we will see why by Peah we include trees. In other words, the context will have a big effect in how to interpret the same word that can mean in one halacha one thing, Sotcha excluding trees, Sotcha including trees. That's more or less going to be today's daf. So yeah, we'll have an opportunity also to chazer over some Hilchais Kalayim without any further ado. Chavra, daf Yud Beis, Amud Aleph, by the Mishnah. Says the Mishnah, Klal Amru B'Pei. The klal is what is included. And number one, these are the five. Kol Shahu Eichel. Anything that's a food. Anything that's a food means it primarily made for human consumption. It excludes, guys, when you have a field upon which you plant that which is primarily used for animal consumption, it also excludes certain products that are primarily planted for dyeing purposes, for the color that you extract from it. So that's oich. Rule number two, nishmar. It has to be something that's protected. Chevra, this excludes hefker. It's very important. In other words, when the owner is going to protect the product from the field and he's harvesting it, then you're obligated, like we already learned, midoraisa, ein lahem shir, midrabanan, at least the 60th, we already learned where you have to leave it. Okay. Number three, the gidul of min haaretz, it has to be a product that's actually growing from the ground, meaning its roots are in the ground. This is a sugya that we have in many areas. I think we mentioned this in the last Masechta Brachas. When it comes to what bracha do you make on a mushroom, l'mashal, you make a shahakal. Why? A mushroom is growing off a tree. Doesn't matter. It's getting its nourishment from the air. The fact that it happens to be on a tree is not of significance. So that's the gidul of min haaretz. That means its roots are in the ground. So, for example, if you have a land and you're growing mushrooms, in LA, mushrooms is a big business. I don't know, the magic mushrooms. You don't have to leave pain. Now, number four, a product that, guys, it becomes ripe at the same time. So when you gather it, you harvest the crop all at once. That excludes the mushel. It's a mushel. It's not only, but there's figs. Figs will be an example of a product that begashmias, they're not ready at the same time. There is mustama a season of a month, 2 months. I'm not a farmer. 3 months where you're going to pick your figs, but it's not. Now is the time to harvest the barley, and you just go and you don't do it by figs. Every day you harvest only that which is ready. That is never included in the obligation of payah. And number five, umachnisa lekiyum. This is going to be the most important one that will exclude so much. Products that are fit to be brought into the house for storage, excluding products that have a very short shelf life. Now, this, guys, becomes exciting. How do you define the very short shelf life? So I just want to give you an example. In the Rambam, as we mentioned in the intro, the Rambam holds that anything that meets all these five is chayiv b'peya middo eiraisa, which will even include vegetables. The Rambam speaks about onions and garlic, that they're chayiv in peya, because and now we have a whole different world. We have refrigeration. It was normal. Certain products, they were left out to dry and they were preserved. That was the way it was done. Because an onion or a garlic, if you don't make it undergo a process, that's for sure not, then it's not going to be chayiv and peya because it's not umachnisa l'kiyum. Another example of a product, just to define machnisa l'kiyum, doesn't mean that naturally it will be good for storage, but the norm is to do something to it which allows it to last a long time. A great example will be grapes and olives. Grapes and olives, in other words, stam fruits, if they're not primarily dried out, they don't have enough shelf life for there to be called a machnisa l'kiyum. So the fact of its peya will exclude most of the fruits. Actually, we're going to have a girsa in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is going to speak about what fruits are included. But again, grapes, since grapes are grown for wine, and by wine, you process the grapes and it turns into wine. Wine is l'kiyum. Olive oil is l'kiyum, so it's included in peya. Another thing, what is kiyum? Like what is called a long shelf life? Okay, these are the big topics that the Yerushalmi speak about. Definitely, if it's for a year, but a year doesn't have to mean 12 months. A year means for a season, for a big season. Yeah,
Is fruits that you make jams then fall into this?
So that would include fruit. Now the question will be, what happens if the majority of the people don't use it for jam? I'm using it for jam. So does it go after the yachid or does it go after the majority of the people? These are all topics that the Yerushalmi speak about. So these are the five. And again, we're going l'shita Rambam that if all five have to be met, chiddush. So it's not only going to be grains, not only going to be legumes, not only going to be greens, trees, everything. Wow. Chayav b'peyam. And therefore, Zajac the Mishnah that hatfua. Now, all of the chiyuvei that are connected to the ground goes on the grains. Even kidneys, legumes, beans, peas, says the Marafuld as examples. Bechlal zem gevaldik. Okay, now we're going to go with the girsa, guys, and that's the whole vart. That will be the whole daf today. That even fruits or orchards will be included if they meet these criteria. But the biggest chiddush will be is that by peya ubekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem loy sechala ta'as sotcha, right? And that will be the whole thing today. Whether the word sotcha excludes trees as it does by kalayim, but by peya the word sotcha we'll see is the word that includes trees. Okay. Ubeilan, what will be an example of fruits that are meeting all the five, including umachnisa l'kiyum, ha'oig. Now, what is oig? So says the Pnei Moshe, 3-4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. So he's excited. He found the kavan on the line, sumac. And indeed, all he says of a pri edoim, it's a red fruit. Corniolis, a cherry light fruit. Even though others debate with that. Hacharuvim, carobs last forever. Now, the carobs taste, I don't know. Don't go there. Don't smell it and eat it. It's very healthy, but they take a last. Hegoizim, walnuts, almonds. In other words, what the Mishnah is trying to point out is your average fruit, an apple, even if it's going to last for a week or two, it's not called a machnesa l'kiyum. Hagafanim, now what about a grape? Like we said, because of wine. Haramoinim, pomegranates, because they would make, I don't know, jam. Zaysim, same thing. Zaysim per se, they didn't last that long, but they made it into olive oil. Tumarim, most of us begin in yeshiva with Elu Metzias, so they used to make these cakes of tumarim. In other words, dates, the way they grow, don't last long, but it was common for them to be preserved. They would dry them and they would squeeze them. They would make a cake out of them. They would become hardened and they would last. They would last a while. So bottom line is all these three are called oichel and they're nishmar, means they're not hefker, the gedul of mino aretz, likitosika achas, umachnisa lekiyom, and therefore concludes the Mishnah, l'rambam midoy raisa chayovim b'peyom. Okay, topic number one, the Gemara is going to discuss, and this is something based on what we learned above. You owning land, you having a land filled with produce in itself is not machayev peya. The chiyuv of peya is only triggered when you begin to harvest. So let's define harvesting. And here are the three ways of harvesting: using a keli, that's called ktsira, right? A sickle when it would come to grains, but other kalim that would remove whatever you're removing. And then you can harvest biyadayim. And when you harvest with your hands, there are two ways of harvesting with your hands. One way will be talisha, plucking. Plucking means that you pick it in a way where you do not uproot the root, but you pluck similar to what you would have cut. Guys, when you cut with a knife, you don't rip it out. In other words, there is something that remains in there. So there's a way of plucking it that way, plucking, toilish. Then you have oiked. Oiked is completely ripping it out. So the first thing the Gemara will establish from a Braisa, I don't care what method you're using. If you are harvesting whichever way you want, you begin, you trigger the obligation of pay. That's simple. Says the Gemara, quoting a Braisa. Guys, the pasuk we already learned yesterday. Let's quote the pasuk again. This is a pasuk in Parshas Kedoshim. It says, "Ubekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem lo yisechala pa'asotcha liktzoy v'leket ketzircha lo yiselake." So ubekutzrechem, the word ktsiram, narrowly refers to harvesting using a utensil, a keli. So you might think if you read only the word of Bekutzrechem that when you chayv at least midoiraisa in the leaving of the peah if you are harvesting with the utensil. How would you know that if you are plucking it by hand? Yes, leaving the root in the ground. So it's not completely dissimilar to using a keli, but it's not the normal way that people harvest. You can only do a little bit out of a time. Maybe it's not enough of an act of harvesting for this to trigger the obligation of payah. So therefore, Talmud loimer liktzoy, and this is gavaldik. So yesterday, if you remember, on Daf Yud Aleph, whoever was here and whoever learned on their own, so we had two already interpretations, two explanations, two versions. Beshitas Reish Lakish. Then we have more. Why the Torah uses the word liktzoy? Because when it says "Ubekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem," it could have said, when you are harvesting, don't completely harvest the whole field. The Torah adds liktzoy. Why does it say liktzoy? So yesterday we learned what we learned yesterday. Today we're learning another limud. The Torah repeats the words ktsira, which means to harvest, to include another method of harvesting. Not only the norm, the keli, even if you're plucking. But when you only have one inclusionary word, you can only include that which is the most similar to harvesting with the keli, and that would be plucking. How is it most similar? Because even though you're going to go a lot slower, but like when you use a utensil, you don't rip out the root, you cut it from its root. When you pluck it, you also pluck it from its root. Toilish means plucking. Uproot means oiker. Daf Yud Beis Amud Beis. The whole big daf we're learning. Now we have to. The girsa is not koitzer. The girsa now is oiker. So now oiker minayin, which you can't include more than one thing from the extra lick. Sorry. So Talmud Leimer. So the Torah uses the word kitzircha. Kitzircha. Now where does the Torah say the word kitzircha? That's the amazing thing. Not by payah. We have it in the next mitzvah, in the same pasuk. So again, the pasuk begins with "Bekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem lo yisechala pa'asotcha liktzoy." Then it says "V'leket ketzircha lo yiselake." Guys, leket means that when you are cutting a bundle of grain with a sickle, it would be normal that with one thrust of the knife, some of the ears would fall out and fall on the ground. Individual ears. And as we're going to learn a whole pedic about leket. So the din is that if only one or two ears, by every stroke of the sickle, it can accumulate, guys. If it falls down, then the Torah says, leave it for the poor. The leket, kitzircha, loy selaket. Don't gather it. Leave it. So since the Torah says the words kitzircha by leket, in the same pasuk where we speak about payah, we are speaking about harvesting. The leket, why the leket ketzircha? You know, it's even though the word ketzircha is written by leket, but it's in the same pasuk and it's not needed. So Chazal learned from that ketzircha that is not only referring to leket, it's referring to payah as well. So we are including two different types aside of the normal. What's the two different types? Plucking and even oiker. Okay, Nukud. So that part of the Braisa is easy. Now, according to the Rambam, this is not an asmachta. This is mamish. Torah Shebal Peh. Moshe Rabbeinu taught us what God told him how to interpret this pasuk. This is all included in Midorais. Ein li'ala tfuah. Sotcha could be limited only to tfuah. Maybe Peah Midorais is only tfuah means 5 grains. 5 grains is wheat, barley, rye, oats, and spelt. So the next one that we are including, kidneys, minayin, legumes. How do you know that they are included? So Talmud loimer ubekutzrechem es ketzir artzechem. Now we're going to focus on the word artzechem. Ubekutzrechem es ketzir. What's the artzechem? Artzechem includes something that grows in the ground or near the ground. What is even smaller than grains? Legumes. Artzechem. Now, maybe vegetables are also included in artzechem. I don't know.
Why is there a base here? The artzechem?
There's different girsois. Actually, it's considered artzechem. If you look inside the Chumash, it doesn't say a base.
Yeah, why would they have a base?
So I don't know. So there were many mistakes in the Yerushalmi. And you have to understand how careful we are not to use our seichel to change any girsois. In other words, just as I know we're getting sidetracked. When you have, how do you know which text is correct? If you have 2 texts, then you use your seichel to figure out which one makes the most sense. But if you only have access to one text, that's all you have. Even if you have a bomb question, like how can the Gemara quote a pasuk in the Chumash where it says like this, says like that? We don't change it that quick. So it's faithful to what they had. Let me put it in parentheses because in our Chumash it doesn't say a base. We're Orthodox. I'm saying we're very careful. We don't deviate so quick. Now comes the final. Ilonis minayin. And as we'll see, like we spoke in the intro, Ilonis should be the least included because, as we'll see, by kalayim, the word satcha dafka excludes. But here, ironically, since it says satcha, loisechala pa'as, satcha likzoy, could have said loisechala pa'as. Loisechala pa'as. Don't harvest it all the way down to the edges. Don't leave, in other words, leave the edges. The word satcha is taka superfluous. So the word satcha comes to include ilonis. Wow. And now, the Gemara is going to say, you see, it's not like in the Babli. Like in the Babli, the Gemara would say, kasha, how can you say the word satcha comes to include trees? Meisvei, kasha, by kalayim, the word satcha excludes trees. This doesn't have to be worded. Finished. Now we're going to learn kalayim. Maha shaychas kalayim. So that's what the Rashidilio says. The reason why we're bringing in kalayim is to point out the question, but it's not going to be a question and answer. It's going to go straight to the answer. That you have to look at the context, and from the context, we're going to learn. We're going to see why here is like this and there is like that. So as we mentioned, and let's just quickly repeat the following. First of all, we have a pasuk. It says Satcha loisizra kilayim. Satcha loisizra kilayim. There is also specific psukim that speak about not to plant in a kedem kilayim. And indeed, there are 2 types of kilayim. And again, this is the way that Rambam organizes this. You have kilei zeroyim and you have kilei hakedem. Kilei zeroyim means that you're not allowed to take 2 different types of grains, 1 seed of wheat, 1 seed of barley. You cannot take two vegetables. You cannot take 2 vegetables and plant them together. Not only is it also when it comes to a vineyard, that in a vineyard you can't plant with the grape seeds, grains, nor vegetables. You can't even plant 2 grains together and 2 vegetables together. Trees, you can plant with a tree a grain. You can plant with a tree a vegetable. You can plant in a vineyard a tree. Wow. In other words, there is an isur of bringing together different types of DNAs of trees together, midoiraisa, only asur if you're grafting. Harkava is asur. Why is that? We're going to get to, because the Torah says, Satcha loy sizra kilayim. Satcha excludes an orchard. It's not about an orchard. And that's what we're going to learn inside. So the unspoken kasha is, hold on. You learn by Peah, the word Satcha is l'rabois sedei ilanas. And the fact is that the word Satcha by default excludes from the Dinei Kilayim. We're talking about learning in the Brais. That zoyim zeroyim v'zarei ilan ka'achas. When you're planting a tree, you can plant, I know the word zeroyim is plural, but you have to understand something. Forget about the tree. I'm not allowed to plant two different types of zeroyim, whether it's grains or whether it's vegetables. Forget about the tree. Zeroyim means one and one. I'm allowed to plant an apple seed together with a banana. Together with a not only two trees together, even a tree and a grain, even a tree and a vegetable.
You're allowed.
You are allowed.
So you're allowed to graft those.
Grafting not. In other words, the issur of crossbreeding, when God created the world, and the way the words are that God's created every living thing has its seed in it. And God says, Liminehem. Limineh means that God wants everything to have the DNA the way God made it. He doesn't want us to mix species together. Even though God doesn't want it, there are different levels of prohibition. And aside, which is fascinating when we learn the Rambam. And by the way, we're going to learn the Peah. We're going to learn it now in the Gemara. We're going to learn Masechtas Kalayim. We're going to have Mishnah. We're going to have Gemara. That sometimes, like by the vineyard, if you violated the product, not only may not be eaten, it's also bahano'ah. Wow. When it comes to other crossbreedings, even though you're not allowed to do it, if you did it, you can eat it. And here we go. By trees, on the level of seed, you can do it lechatchila. On the level of seed, zeroyim, two trees, or a vegetable and a tree, or a grain with a tree. But you cannot graft. But there also, if you grafted, then you can eat it. In that irony. Huh? You can buy in the market. Yeah. There are many fruits today that are a product of a mixture. But I just want you to know again that midoiraisa, if they were mixed on the seed level, no violation happened. The violation is if it's grafted. And even if that violation happened, you can still eat it. Which is a big chiddush. Normally, if you break the rule, how can you have a benefit from it? We're going to learn Masechtas Kalayim.
Grafting is putting the seeds in?
The physical, the difference is beruchni is the concept. I don't know. The physical, we know. In other words, how do you create a new product? Either on the level of seed, or you have a tree of one type, you have a tree of another type. You take the branch off a tree that already has fruit on it. You have to know how to remove the branch and how to insert it into the other tree. That's called grafting. That's grafting. That is by trees. That's awesome. But as far as the pasuk of Satcha loy sizra kilayim, it has nothing to do with trees. Zoyim zeroyim zarei ilan gavaldik. And however, but you can call it a tree. The vine is different. If you plant a zera with a chartzon, then you're like a arboin. Okay. And just to point out over here that what we said before about the contrast is in the Rashi D'Elio. Look inside the left column, around 6 lines from the top. The left column, 6 lines. But let's go on the Divrei HaMaskal, 3 lines from the top. First of all, the Brais is telling you 2 things. Number 1, chada, you see it? The shnei minei ilim zoyrim ka'achas. You can plant 2 seeds of different trees together. Number 1. Va'oid, and even more than that. The zoyrim zar'onei diyarek, that you can plant a vegetable, a seed of a vegetable, or a seed of tevuah. You can plant it bahadei zera ilan. You can plant it with a tree. Why? The ein kilayim ella. We're talking about kilei zeroyim, not kilei akerem. The ein kilayim ella zeroyim the tevuah v'yerek bahadei hadadi Oh, got it. That's the brisa. No, there is one exception. To take a seed of a grape, to take a vegetable, to plant it together with a charzon. Charzon is a grape seed. Oh, that's also midoraisa. Boy. So we're going from something that's also midoraisa to something that's not even also midarabanan. You can plant two seeds together. What's the point? Says the Rashi Ilio, va'af al gav d'chsiv sotcha le'sizra kalayim. Even though it says sotcha, and we just established that the word sotcha by peya is actually the word that's merabah, that's marbe, this te'ilon. So normally Chazal learn gzeira shava, sotcha sotcha. V'lo yalef sotcha d'kalayim is sotcha d'chsiv gav peya. And by the way, the Rashi Ilio adds something also amazing. We're going to learn Masechta Shemitah also. Shvi'is does not exclude the tree so quickly. They are included in the Isur, even though the Torah also uses the word Satcha. So actually, the word Satcha, which includes Elon, orchards, is by Peah and by Shvi'is. So really, if you want to do a Kasha Teretz, what a Kasha is, why didn't Chazal say that the pasuk Satcha loisizra kilayim Satcha, why don't we say that it includes stay Elam? We're not asking it that way. The Rashi is pointing out, and then he says, why did the Yerushalmi bring the whole topic of Kalayim? Because of what we just mentioned. Okay, now, let's go. Amar Rab Zeir, says Rab Zeir. When it comes to Kalayim, the pasuk says, Loisizra and as the the commentators point out, the Torah could have said, what does it say? Why was it formulated that way? Chazal will tell you, because we want to juxtapose the word zera and the word kerem. Zera and kerem. Why are we putting together the word seed and kerem? To teach you that iker kalayim, not only when you already have a vineyard, should you not plant grains or vegetables in it. What happens if you don't yet have a vineyard? If you are planting your vineyard, if the kerem is still on the level of a seed, a charzon, the reason why the Torah formulated the expression in a way where we're going to have the words tizra, neighboring the word karmecha, is to tell you, iker karmecha le'sizra kalayim, iker karmecha. In other words, I'm reading inside that Asher Elio 9 lines, left column from the top. The Lord Tamer don't say dafka michi have a kerem. You might think only when you already have a kerem, then you may not plant in it l'zroi b'minach. But maybe when you are planting it lachatchila, avu ba'hadi charzon, like to plant a grain of wheat together with a grape seed, maybe it's not included. So that's why the Torah says no, that even if the kerem is a zera still. Actually, I want you to know, ironically, that not only is it even, but planting a grain with grape seeds, planting vegetables with grape seeds, is that for which you'll be chayiv malchus. Worse, if you already have a vineyard and now you added things in it, tfua or yerek, even though it's asan midoy raisa, you won't be chayiv malchus. Because we are teaching the pasuk. This is a love. You get malchus for a love. When it says loy sizra karmecha kalayim, not karmecha loy tizra kalayim, then it would have meant you have a kedem already. You have a kedem, and in the kedem don't plant other seeds. It doesn't say it that way. It says loy sizra karmecha. The love is when the kedem is still a zera. When the kedem is still a zera. When you have grape seeds. There's more details that Rambam actually paskins that when you chayv midoy raisa, when you're planting two types of zera with grapeseed. In other words, it's not just chita and charzon, not just so'oida, it's chita v'so'oida v'charzon b'mapoy l'siyad. But we're going to learn more of that when we come to the Masechtas Kalayim. Okay. So now, Says the Gemara. Now this will be the way the Yerushalmi is going to explain what we just spoke out on the intro. We read on the Rashi, the difference. Rabbi Yudan of Kaputkia asked the following question in front of Rabbi Yosef. And here's this discussion. Forget about Peah for a second. Now we're going to learn today a third topic. Let me just say the third topic. It says in Parsha Shmini. The Parsha there, if you remember, the end, it's about Tumantara. And the biblical source of Hechsher, Tuma, is in Parsha Shmini. The Torah is speaking about how a carcass of an animal, an avela, even if it's a kosher type of animal, if it did not have shchita, that the carcass that gives off Tuma. Nevertheless, the Torah says that the chiyipoil minivlasam, that if any part of a nevela, kizayis or more, will fall, I'll call zera zeirua asher yizoreya. If a carcass of an nevela falls on seeds, taharu. Why? How is it tahar? So it says in the next pasuk, but v'chi yutan ma'im al zera. If prior to the contact of an nevela, water, yutan, yitain, remember the whole limud, that if water was applied to the case, zera means a seed. We'll see it includes everything, any food item, but zera means seed. If it was placed with the contentment of, with the consent of, or the contentment of the owner, then the Torah says, if after it got wet, then the nafal minivlasam tamei. That's the source of Hechsher Tumah, which means that any food, really, zera, it's everything. Any food, guys, almost everything that grows from the ground will be wet when it's growing because it rains, even in LA. But that doesn't count. When it's harvested, from then, even if a source of Tumah will touch it, we're speaking about Nevela, it will not acquire Tumah only if prior to that halachic contact, kiyutan mayim. Now, really, mayim doesn't only mean mayim. We have the 7 liquids as an amonic to remember. It's yad, shachat, dam. Yayin, devash, shemen, chalav, tal, right? Dam and mayim. These are the 7 liquids. But let's speak about water. So if water was placed on it, then, and even if the water later was dried, since, and yeah, with all the details, it's not the water fell stam, or if water fell and the owner is not content, it's almost as if he needed to place it, even though it says ki yutan. Yutan means it fell, but since it could be read yutan, yitain, yutan, it doesn't have to be that. You place it, but you have to be berotz and habal. Din of hechsher mai. We're good? We're good. Says the Braisa, Tamon Amrinon. By the laws of Kalayim, as we just said, we mentioned, Ein Zare Ilan Kuruim Zerayim. The Torah says, Sotcha Loisizra Kalayim. We just mentioned, Sotcha Loisizra Kalayim does not include orchards. So I have a simple kasha. If we are excluding, guys, trees from the Isur of Kalayim, you could lechatchila plant 2 ilanis together. You can plant in an orchard tfuah. You can plant in an orchard, you can plant vegetables. People do that. People do this today in their backyard. They have trees and they plant vegetables. There's no problem. So now the kasha is, why is it that by Hechsher are seeds of fruits? And our fruits, do they require the prerequisite of Hechsher? Do we say, no, that when the Torah says that the chiyipol min avlasam will call zera, zeru asher yizoreya, oh, zera is not, zera, leisizra karmacha kalayim. That zera is not trees. So if trees are not in zera, l'chura you would say that in the dinim of hechsher, when the Torah says that prior to the nevela having contact with the zera, prior to that, if it wasn't kiyutan mayim, then it's tar. Do we say that by trees? Yes, we do. Do we say it by tree pits? Yes, we do. Why? Why don't we exclude trees from the necessity of hechsher? Why are we not machmer? Why don't we say that if a nevela has contact with an apple, if nevela has contact with the seeds of any fruit, they will impart tumah, even if it was not muksher. Why do you need hechsher? Because the Torah says in Shmini, the chiyipol min avlasam kol zera zeru asher yizoreya. Zera, zera is not trees. How do I know zera is not trees? Because Taman Amrinon by Kalayim, even though the Torah says Satcholoi Sizra Kalayim, we clearly excluded from the word zera trees. Ein zara ilan kuroim zeroim. Here, this is Akash. No, we're not going with Peah, with Satcha. We're going to this stira of Zera Zera. And over here, you guys, beautiful. But here, by Hechshed, we're saying that Zadei Ilin are Kol Zerayim. So why is that? Is that a trees or is that a not trees? Amalei, that's a Gvaldic question. So Rabbi Yossi answers, I'll tell you why. Context. Tamon, by Kilayim, the Torah doesn't repeat the word Zera many times. The Torah does not repeat it many times. Zera, without an addition, without a repetition, without other context, Zera per se, Zera does not include Ilan. Even though you can argue every Ilan comes from a seed, and every fruit has a seed, doesn't matter. Zera is tvua, Zera is legumes, Zera is vegetables, Zera is not Ilan. Over there, play even better. In other words, when the Torah uses Zera, Nigla always says that Dibra Torah Koloshim B'nei Adam, Ein Derech B'nei Adam. Who knows Hebrew? When you speak about planting a tree, do you say you were Zoreya a tree? No. What lashon? There's another lashon. How do you say it? Nata, kisita. Very good. So when it says Sotcha loy sizra, not Sotcha loy sita, it's a lashon without other reasons that excludes trees. Now, by the way, this is the Rash Elio. So this already will explain that since the word sizra, as a rule, excludes trees, so it's megale that the word Sotcha by Kalayim does not mean trees. Why not? Because of the word Sizra. However, beautiful. But over here, we're over here by Hechsher Zeroim, by Parsha Shmini. It says, what does it say again? Listen, I'll call Zera Zeirua Asher Yizoreya. How many times can you say the word Zera? Since Riba HaKosev, I'll call Zera Zeirua and Chanami. It would not have been included. But the Torah repeats the word Zera 3 times. You know what it includes? It includes, I'll tell you what it includes. Not only does it include trees, really, the din of Hechshed, you know what Hechshed goes on? On meat. It goes on every food. Because the Torah was Marbei. Gavaldik. In other words, you have to know the context. Okay. We're stopping over here. We are going to be continued.